The United States government calls Houthis to de-escalate and stop their attack on Ma'rib. The Gulf Cooperation Council renews its support for a political solution in Yemen. Key international aid agencies call on the UN Security Council to end the war in the country. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fouad. The United Nations Special Envoy Hans Grunberg said on his briefing before the United Nations Security Council that military options will not result in sustainable solutions, calling for de-escalation of military activities and directly engage in UN-sponsored political talks. For his part, Ambassador Abdullah al-Saadi, representative of Yemen, said the rebels are buying more time in violating international conventions.
The Security Council has held its monthly briefing on the developments on Yemen. On his speech to the Council, Ambassador Abdullah Saadi, representative of Yemen, said the country is facing hard conscience due to the Houthi escalation, adding that the rebels are buying more time and violating international conventions.
The Houthi militias view these peace efforts as a tool to continue the war to impose a fait accompli, because they believe they have been chosen by God as a superior group. These militias have used all international and regional initiatives as a tool to buy time to continue their war and their aggression on Yemen, to continue to attack Saudi Arabia with ballistic missiles and drones, and to continue to harass international organizations, humanitarian workers, and diplomatic property in areas under their control.
Special Envoy Hans Grunberg, for his part, addressed the Council, submitting proposals for a solution to the crisis. In his speech, the Special Envoy warned, however, that the intensification of fighting is endangering civilians and in many cases forcing them to flee for a second or even a third time.
I am deeply alarmed by the ongoing military escalation and continued violence in Yemen. Since I last addressed this Council, the conflict has escalated considerably. There is a risk that this could open a new chapter of Yemen's war that is even more fragmented and bloody. This risk is acknowledged by a wide range of Yemeni and regional interlocutors. Yet, even as the conflict parties all profess to me their desire for peace, their focus remains on military options. I have been clear that military options will not result in sustainable solutions. Restraint, de-escalation, and dialogue are urgently needed now.
Based on these conclusions, Grunberg told the Security Council that there is a need for an inclusive Yemeni-owned and internationally supported political process. He outlined that the process should support near-term solutions to de-escalate violence, prevent further economic deterioration, and mitigate the impact of the conflict on civilians. According to the Special Envoy, the political process should also identify and build consensus around the elements of a political settlement that sustainably ends the war, establishes inclusive governance arrangements, and ensures Yemeni civil, political, social, economic, and cultural rights.
During the Security Council meeting, the United States Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Greenfield, urged all parties to engage with the Special Envoy in good faith. She called on Houthis to cease their actions in Ma'rib.
The Houthis have ignored repeated calls from this Council and the international community to cease their offensive in Ma'rib province. The offensive endangers thousands of civilians, and OCHA has warned it could lead to the displacement of 500,000 people. The Houthis must stop this offensive immediately. These provocative and dangerous actions are impediments to peace. They also underscore the need for Iran to end its lethal support to the Houthis, which contravenes this body's resolutions and enables the Houthis' reckless attacks. Each of these Houthi attacks on its own is unacceptable. Together, they send a chilling and unmistakable signal about Houthi unwillingness to participate in a peaceful political process or in a future government that upholds the rule of law.
For his part, the United Nations Acting Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs said that there are serious gaps in providing aid to the most vulnerable people in Ma'rib and elsewhere. The gap is primarily due to funding constraints, which are about to get worse.
We also renew our calls for Ansar Allah to stop the Ma'rib offensive and for parties to adopt a nationwide ceasefire that will end the fighting everywhere else. And across the country, the wider aid operation is helping more than 11 million people every month, or about 1/3 of the population. These programs are making an enormous difference, but they also face serious gaps in their ability to provide a comprehensive response to the most vulnerable people in Ma'rib and elsewhere.
The representative of Yemen to the United Nations, Ambassador Abdullah Al-Saadi, discussed in New York with the United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator David Gressly the humanitarian and economic situation in Yemen. Al-Saadi reiterated that the international community should condemn Houthi violations and put pressure on the rebels to accept a comprehensive ceasefire and resume the political process. For his part, Gressly confirmed that the United Nations is currently conducting a comprehensive study in Yemen to accurately determine the humanitarian needs, expecting the study to be completed early next year. The Gulf Cooperation Council reiterated the need to end the Yemeni crisis and to reach a political solution in a manner that preserves the unity and integrity of Yemen and respects its sovereignty and independence. The final statement, issued by the 42nd session of the Supreme Council of the Gulf Cooperation Council, reiterated its support for the efforts of the United Nations to reach a political solution in accordance with these references. Minister of Information Muammar al-Eryani warned against luring children under the age of 18 by Houthis to fight in its ranks. He said the Houthi militia recruit children in areas under its control and send them in suicide attacks on various fronts of Ma'rib, besides using them as human shields. El-Eryani indicated that the children make more than 30% of the human losses in recent battles. World-leading international and governmental relief organizations called on the international community to bring an end to the ongoing violence. Aid agencies called on conflict parties to refrain from reprisal attacks. More about that is in the following report.
World international relief organizations called on the United Nations Security Council to end hostilities to bring an end to the ongoing violence in Yemen. Renewed hostilities have a devastating impact on thousands of vulnerable families. The statement said international relief organizations, including the Danish Refuge Council, Oxfam and Save the Children, called in a joint statement for facilitating unimpeded humanitarian access in all areas. Aid agencies called on all parties to the conflict to reaffirm their obligations under international humanitarian law. Conflict in Yemen heads towards its 8 years. It continues to cause widespread civilian loss of life, injury and displacement. Critical infrastructures such as schools, hospitals and roads are destroyed. The economy is devastated. The organizations indicated that humanitarian needs in the Red Sea coast are extremely high, particularly in locations of previous front lines, which have not been accessible by humanitarian actors for more than 3 years. Hostilities renewed in November, forcing over 25,000 people in the area to flee their homes. In Tuhaita, there is one limited health facility operating out of a private home. The agency said that indiscriminate shelling continues to injure and kill civilians and destroy critical public infrastructure. Aid agencies warned that humanitarian needs in the area are extremely high. Stockholm Agreement, signed 3 years ago, was designed to avert catastrophic military escalation. 3 years on, limited implementation of the agreement means that civilians continue to bear the ongoing conflict. In Ma'rib, the number of displaced people in camps has risen nearly tenfold since September, with over 45,000 people fleeing their homes as Houthis continue their offensive. According to the UN, migration conditions at 137 displacement sites are poor and deteriorating, with warnings from a larger exodus should fighting reach the city. International aid agencies' calls come at a time where UN-led efforts to agree a ceasefire have stalled.
The U.S. Navy tested a laser weapon and destroyed the floating target in the Middle East. The system could be used to counter drone boats deployed by Houthi rebels in the Red Sea. The Navy's Fifth Fleet described the laser as having successfully engaged with the target. Previously, the system was used to bring down a flying drone in May 2020. Turning to Ma'rib, the Houthi militia launched 2 missiles targeting populated areas in the city of Ma'rib. This came at a time when the government forces liberated new sites in the southern fronts and inflicted heavy losses on the Houthi militia. A military source said the government forces launched a large-scale attack on the Houthi militia's positions in the southern front of Ma'rib, during which they were able to purify ruling positions and inflicted the Houthi militia with great losses. The artillery of the government forces targeted separate gatherings of the Houthi militia and inflicted heavy losses on them. The coalition in Yemen carried out 29 operations against the Houthi militia in Ma'rib and the west coast. The operations killed more than 165 terrorist elements of the Houthi militia. A number of Houthi militants were killed and others wounded in Taiz and Hodeidah, west of Yemen. A military source said the joint forces target movements of the militia in the Makbana district west of Taiz and Al-Jarrahi south of Hodeidah. The source confirmed the destruction of 5 Houthi crews. Local sources in Taiz governorate said dozens were killed and injured in 2 explosions at a market. The sources added that a person threw 2 bombs at the Freedom Market in Sharab district, while the second bomb exploded in the hands of the attacker, who was seriously injured. In Hodeidah, 5 civilians from 1 family, including 3 children, were killed and injured in a Houthi landmine explosion in Hais. Local sources reported that after the family returned from displacement to their home in Makana village, a Houthi mine exploded while they were in the yard of their house, killing 2 children and injuring 3 others. Coming next. High prices of food items aggravate people's suffering amid possible closure of local bakeries.
اضطرينا نحن نغادر من ذي وزحنا.
الله يستبدلكم يا محويتني لا الله يستبدل.
Welcome back. The governor of Aden issued a decision to form the higher supervisory committee to oversee manipulators in real estate market. The committee will regulate the market by using the national currency in any real estate transaction. This comes at a time where the economic situation continues to crumble and the national currency drops against foreign currencies. In Aden, also the Ministry of Industry and Trade called on all merchants and importers to ease the hardship of citizens, especially with regard to basic food and consumer goods. The ministry confirmed that it will control prices to find out price manipulators and refer them to prosecutors. The rise in prices and the continued collapse of the currency doubled the suffering of citizens, and dozens of bakeries in Aden closed their doors in protest against the rise in the prices of flour. The Fung report has more details on this.
The sharp decline in the Yemeni currency's value started to severely affect the people who are already coping with the deteriorated situation caused by the 7 Years' War. The United Nations World Food Programme in Yemen warned in December 2020 that the rial had lost 250% of its value since the start of the war in 2015, which has led to an increase in food prices by 140%. In 2017, the Yemeni government floated the national currency, a move that economic observers and analysts said was not well studied a year after the relocation of the central bank to Aden. Flour prices rose for the third time in less than a week, from 38,000 to 42,000 rials, and then increased its price to 45,000 per bag of flour, which constitutes a major obstacle in the issue of roti bread and its sale. Owners of the bakeries in Aden have closed their doors in protest against the rise in the price of flour. These bakeries were unable to adapt to the stifling wave of high prices, which made it more difficult to provide citizens with the most important food for them, which is bread of all kinds. The strike will continue until there are real and radical solutions to this crisis. People used to buy roti for one meal for approximately 1,500 rials, but lately they find no alternative but the light roti, which doesn't satisfy those accustomed to the traditional one. All investments, including oil and gas projects, whose revenues used to contribute more than 70% of the state budget, were shut down. All the commercial banks and exchange companies operating in the southern port city of Aden closed their doors after the sharp devaluation of the local currency against major foreign currencies. The Yemeni economy is continuing to suffer after all exports were halted following a blockade on the country. The blockade has also restricted imports largely. It is necessary for officials to put an end to the farce that's occurring as a result of the collapse of the economy, as the deplorable conditions are a real suffering that the Yemenis suffer from every day.
Fluctuation of oil prices in Yemen is caused by a number of reasons. This fluctuation casts its shadows on the citizen who hardly search for his daily living. More in the following report.
There are many reasons for the fluctuation in oil prices in Yemen, especially in the areas liberated from the Houthi rebels. Experts say the fluctuation in the prices of oil in Yemen leads to a spiral rise in other products, the most basic of which is foodstuff. Looking at Yemen as an oil exporting country, data shows that it holds 3 trillion barrels of oil reserves as of 2016. Yemen ranks 29th in the world and accounts for about 0.2% of the world's total oil reserves. Oil reserves in Yemen are equivalent to 137 times its annual consumption. That means that without net exports, there would be about 137 years of oil left for the next generation. Facts on the ground are totally different. The prices of oil derivatives rose by 100%. The reasons behind the oil crisis are many and can be traced back to wrong practices and failure to deal with the economic file in many aspects, such as wasting of resources, irrational expenditures, and freezing the work of institutions and economic units. According to economic experts, the country is being affected by the rise in international oil prices, given that Yemen is forced to import oil and its derivatives from abroad. The rise of the dollar against the local currency contributed to the unprecedented rise in fuel prices, in addition to the absence of competition in importation and the absence of price control. This crazy hike in oil products forces ordinary citizens to voice their repeated complaints through staging demonstrations and strikes, while others choose silence and continue on with their lives.
Turning to health, the National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 6 new cases of the COVID-19 in 3 governments. Committee officials said on Twitter that 4 cases were recorded in Taiz and 2 in Aden. Also, 6 recovered cases were recorded and 1 death. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 10,081, including 1,973 deaths and 6,955 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. The United States government calls Houthis to de-escalate and stop their attack on Ma'rib. The Gulf Cooperation Council renews its support for a political solution in Yemen. Key international aid agencies call on the UN Security Council to end the war in the country. This is the end of the news. It was Roshan Fouad. Thank you for watching.